They found a leopard kidnapped a lion cub. What happened next will break your heart. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly beneath a canopy of stars, its ancient rhythms undisturbed by the passage of human time. In the heart of Big Sky Reserve, Dr. Sarah Beth Crawford made her way through the pre-dawn darkness toward the research station that had been her second home for the past 8 years. At 45, Sarah had dedicated her life to understanding the intricate web of relationships that govern this pristine ecosystem. Her weathered hands bore the scars of countless field expeditions, and her keen gray eyes had witnessed the full spectrum of nature's beauty and brutality. But nothing in her extensive career had prepared her for what awaited her on the screen of camera trap 47. The timestamp read 3:47 a.m., captured just hours earlier by the motion-activated infrared system that monitored the reserve's most active predator corridors. The footage showed a scene that violated every principle of evolutionary biology Sarah had ever studied. A female leopard moved through the moonlit underbrush with unmistakable maternal purpose, carrying something precious in her powerful jaws. But this wasn't prey, and it wasn't her own offspring. Dangling gently from Maggie's mouth was a lion cub, golden-furred and very much alive, being transported with the same exquisite care she would show her own young. Sarah's coffee cup trembled in her hands as she replayed the footage for the 7th time, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. Maggie was a leopard she knew intimately, a 7-year-old female whose territory encompassed nearly 12 square miles of prime hunting ground. Battle-scarred from years of territorial disputes and renowned among the research team for her exceptional intelligence. Maggie had been the subject of Sarah's doctoral dissertation and countless subsequent studies. But this behavior transcended everything in the scientific literature. Leopards and lions represented the pinnacle of evolutionary divergence within the big cat family. Their entire existence was defined by competition for territory, prey, and survival itself. Lions, with their social structure and ground-based hunting strategies, were the antithesis of everything leopards represented. For a leopard to adopt a lion cub wasn't just unlikely, it should have been biologically impossible. "This can't be happening," Sarah whispered to the humming equipment that surrounded her workstation. She enhanced the image quality, verified the camera's calibration, cross-referenced the timestamp with weather data. Everything confirmed what her mind refused to accept. This wasn't predation, territorial aggression, or some elaborate form of prey caching. This was adoption, pure and simple. The implications sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the Montana morning. She reached for her secure phone and called Dr. Jonathan Rivers, her longtime research partner and the reserve's head of mammalian studies. Despite the early hour, she knew he would understand the urgency in her voice. "Jonathan, I need you at the station immediately," she said when he answered, her words tight with barely contained excitement and disbelief. "I'm looking at footage that rewrites everything we know about interspecies behavior." While waiting for Jonathan's arrival, Sarah's thoughts turned to the catastrophic events of 2 weeks prior. The spring floods had been unprecedented that year, arriving with a violence that caught even experienced meteorologists off guard. Climate change had made weather patterns increasingly unpredictable, and this season had delivered a perfect storm of early snowmelt, unseasonable rainfall, and geological instability that had transformed the reserve's gentle waterways into raging torrents. She remembered standing on the observation tower, watching in helpless fascination as the usually tranquil Clearwater Creek became a chocolate-brown monster that devoured everything in its path. Ancient trees, some over 200 years old, had been uprooted like toothpicks. Rocky outcroppings that had stood for millennia were reshaped in hours. And somewhere in that chaos, 3 leopard cubs had lost their lives. Maggie's den had been a masterpiece of natural architecture, carved into a rocky alcove beside what had been a seasonal stream. The location had seemed perfect, elevated enough to avoid typical flooding, yet close enough to water to provide easy access for a nursing mother. But there had been nothing typical about this deluge. Sarah had watched through high-powered binoculars as Maggie returned from what should have been a routine hunting expedition to find her carefully constructed home submerged beneath 15 feet of churning, debris-laden water. The leopard's anguish had been heartbreaking to witness and impossible to forget. For 6 straight hours, Maggie had paced the flooded banks, her desperate calls echoing across the transformed landscape as she searched for her cubs. The sound was unlike anything Sarah had heard in her decades of fieldwork, a mother's lament that seemed to rise from the very core of her being, raw and primal and utterly devastating. It was the sound of a heart breaking in a language that transcended species. When hope finally died and acceptance took its cruel place, Maggie had climbed to her favorite perch in the massive sycamore tree that had become the landmark of her territory. There she remained motionless for nearly 72 hours, her golden eyes reflecting a grief so profound it seemed to dim the very light around her. The days following the flood had been equally painful to document. Maggie wandered through her domain like a phantom, her body still heavy with milk that would never nourish her lost young. She moved with the mechanical precision necessary for survival, while her spirit seemed to have departed with her cubs. Sarah and her team had debated intervention extensively, perhaps temporary captivity to help her through the worst of the trauma, or relocation to a territory with fewer painful memories. But the reserve's strict non-interference policy demanded they allow nature to take its course. 30 minutes after her urgent phone call, Jonathan burst through the station door with characteristic energy, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from his hurried journey across the reserve. At 52, he possessed one of the most analytical minds in wildlife research, with a reputation for skepticism that made him the perfect counterbalance to Sarah's more intuitive approach to animal behavior. "Show me what's got you so rattled," he said without preamble, settling into the chair beside her workstation with the focused intensity that had made him legendary in research circles. Sarah played the footage without commentary, watching his expression transform from mild curiosity to wonder to complete bewilderment. She had worked with Jonathan for over a decade, and she had never seen him at a loss for words. His silence stretched for nearly a minute before he finally spoke. "Sarah, this contradicts every principle of interspecies behavior we've established," he said, his voice carrying an unusual tremor. "Their scent markers alone should trigger immediate aggressive responses. We're looking at the behavioral equivalent of matter and antimatter occupying the same space." "I know," Sarah replied, rewinding to highlight specific behavioral markers she had identified. "But look at her posture. Jonathan, the way she carries him, the angle of her head, the care in every movement, it's textbook maternal transport behavior. And here, see how she positions her body? That's classic protective positioning. She's not just tolerating this cub, she's bonding with him at the neurochemical level." Over the following days, their expanding network of trail cameras revealed the full scope of what they began calling the Montana Miracle. Maggie had not only adopted the lion cub, but was caring for him with a devotion that matched or exceeded anything they had observed in biological mother-offspring relationships. She had settled him into the same nest where her own cubs had lived, the carefully woven depression of branches, leaves, and moss in the sycamore's broad fork that had served as nursery, playground, and fortress. The research team named the cub Benji, though his origin remained one of the most puzzling aspects of the entire phenomenon. Lions weren't native to this region of Montana. The pride that had recently established territory in the reserve's southern section was part of a controversial reintroduction program that had begun 3 years earlier. How a lone cub had ended up in leopard territory, nearly 15 miles from any documented lion activity, was a mystery that would fuel academic speculation for years. Dr. Emily Watson, the reserve's animal psychologist and the youngest member of their research team at 31, was the first to witness their nursing behavior through direct observation. She had been conducting routine behavioral monitoring from a camouflage blind when she observed Benji approach Maggie with the instinctive movements of a hungry infant seeking nourishment. "I held my breath for what felt like an eternity," Emily reported during their evening briefing, her usual scientific composure cracking with remembered emotion. "Every instinct told me I was about to witness either violent rejection or outright aggression. Instead, I watched Maggie settle into the classic nursing position as naturally as if Benji had been born to her. The relief in her posture was unmistakable. Her milk had been causing her physical discomfort for days, a constant reminder of her loss. When Benji finally latched on and began to nurse, it was like watching a miracle unfold in real time." Sarah documented every aspect of their developing relationship with the thoroughness of a dedicated scientist and the wonder of someone witnessing the impossible. Maggie's maternal instincts had completely overridden millions of years of evolutionary programming that should have made her view Benji as either a threat to eliminate or a competitor to drive away. Instead, she groomed him with the same meticulous care she had shown her biological offspring, her rough tongue smoothing his golden fur while he purred with the deep contentment of a thoroughly loved child. The teaching process that followed was perhaps even more remarkable than the initial adoption. Maggie somehow intuited that lion cubs develop differently from leopard cubs, with different instinctual drives and physical capabilities, and she adapted her instruction accordingly. She began with basic climbing lessons, though Benji's heavier build and different center of gravity made the traditional leopard techniques challenging for him to master. Dr. Marcus Thompson, a biomechanics specialist who joined the study in its third week, was fascinated by Maggie's innovative teaching methods. "She's developing entirely new pedagogical techniques," he explained to a visiting delegation of wildlife biologists. "Traditional leopard instruction relies on imitation and repetition, but Benji's different physiology requires different approaches. Maggie is essentially inventing new ways to teach climbing, hunting, and survival skills that accommodate his lion characteristics while building on leopard strengths." The first major test of their bond came during a moonless night in late spring, when the Montana darkness was so complete it seemed to swallow sound itself. A pack of hyenas, drawn by the unusual scent combination emanating from Maggie's territory, approached the sycamore tree with the calculated stealth that made them such successful scavengers and opportunistic predators. The trail cameras captured every moment of the ensuing battle, and Sarah found herself gripping the edge of her desk as she watched the footage the following morning. When the hyenas began their ascent, their eyes reflecting the infrared illumination like malevolent stars, Maggie's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying in its completeness. The nurturing mother disappeared entirely, replaced by an apex predator operating at the absolute peak of her lethal capabilities. She positioned herself between Benji and the approaching threat, her spotted coat bristling with fury, her usual silent grace replaced by a display of raw, protective aggression that took Sarah's breath away. The battle was conducted in 3 dimensions, 50 feet above the ground, where one miscalculation meant death. Maggie's superior agility and intimate knowledge of every branch and fork gave her strategic advantages, but the hyenas' pack coordination and relentless determination made them formidable opponents. The conflict lasted nearly 25 minutes, an eternity, in the compressed time frame of predator combat. When dawn finally broke over the battlefield, Maggie bore deep gashes across her shoulders and flanks, wounds that would heal into permanent scars testifying to her fierce protection of her adopted son. Blood matted her beautiful spotted coat, and exhaustion showed in every line of her powerful body. Yet throughout the entire encounter, she had never abandoned her position between Benji and danger, never wavered in her absolute commitment to his protection. Most remarkably, Benji had slept peacefully through much of the conflict, secure in his complete trust in her ability to keep him safe. "This is the only thing that's ever made me believe in miracles," Jonathan said quietly as they reviewed the footage together, his lifelong scientific skepticism crumbling in the face of such extraordinary devotion. Patricia Reynolds, the reserve's senior ethologist, joined the research team 6 weeks into the adoption period, bringing with her 40 years of experience studying predator behavior across 6 continents. Even her vast expertise couldn't provide a framework for understanding what they were witnessing. "Every parameter we use to analyze animal behavior has been rendered meaningless," she told Sarah during one of their extensive consultations. "Scent recognition, territorial instincts, prey drive, species-specific social structures, neurochemical bonding patterns, Maggie is simultaneously overriding all of them. The neurological rewiring required for this level of behavioral adaptation should be impossible in a wild animal. We're not just observing unusual behavior, we're documenting the real-time evolution of consciousness itself." As summer progressed and the Montana landscape transformed into a tapestry of wildflowers and green meadows, the unlikely family settled into rhythms that continued to amaze and perplex the research team. Maggie proved remarkably adaptable in her teaching methods, somehow understanding that Benji's lion heritage required different approaches than traditional leopard instruction. She would carry him on hunting expeditions, allowing him to observe the subtle art of stalking from positions of safety while she demonstrated techniques that blended stealth with strategic thinking. His natural lion instincts sometimes conflicted with her leopard lessons, where she emphasized patience and careful observation. His nature urged him toward more direct confrontation, but Maggie found ways to channel his natural aggression into more sophisticated approaches that maximize his strengths while minimizing his vulnerabilities. One incident that particularly impressed the research team occurred when Benji was 5 months old and beginning to show real independence in his movement. Sarah was conducting direct observations from her hidden blind when she witnessed what she later described as the most remarkable display of cross-species problem-solving I've ever documented. Benji, attempting to follow Maggie up a particularly challenging sequence of branches, found himself genuinely stuck at the hips. His heavier lion build, perfectly adapted for ground-based hunting, proved unsuitable for the narrow perch that Maggie navigated with ease in the wild. Such moments often separated the survivors from the casualties. A predator unable to keep up was typically abandoned to figure out survival independently or perish in the attempt. But Maggie's response defied every expectation based on known predator behavior. Instead of continuing upward and leaving Benji to solve his own problem, she carefully maneuvered behind him, assessing the situation with the analytical precision of an engineer, using her head and shoulders as leverage points. She pushed him past the obstacle while simultaneously providing verbal encouragement through a series of soft chirps and purrs that Sarah had never heard her use before. The entire rescue took nearly 15 minutes, during which Maggie demonstrated infinite patience and unwavering determination. When they finally reached the safety of the higher branches, she spent almost 20 minutes grooming him thoroughly, as if to reassure him that his differences weren't weaknesses, but simply challenges that could be overcome through cooperation and persistence. Their play sessions revealed yet another layer of their extraordinary relationship. Benji's lion instincts led him to wrestling games and pouncing exercises that would have been familiar in any pride. But Maggie adapted these activities to their arboreal environment with remarkable creativity. She taught him to use the tree's complex structure as both playground and potential fortress, turning branches into launching points, natural gaps into strategic obstacles, and the interplay of light and shadow into camouflage opportunities. More importantly, she taught him survival techniques that might prove crucial in an uncertain future. Playing dead wasn't typical lion behavior, but Maggie recognized that Benji's unusual circumstances might require unconventional responses to threats. She would stage elaborate mock attacks, teaching him to distinguish between situations that demanded aggression and those that required submission, flight, or strategic deception. Emily Watson documented one particularly touching scene during a severe thunderstorm in late July. The Montana sky had turned nearly black with towering cumulonimbus clouds, and lightning split the heavens with displays of electrical fury that shook the ground. Rain lashed the prairie with unprecedented intensity, and wind gusts reached nearly 60 miles per hour. The cameras captured both animals huddled together in a natural hollow beneath the sycamore's massive root system, their bodies pressed close for warmth and comfort. In this moment of shared vulnerability, Benji demonstrated the profound depth of their bond by positioning his increasingly bushy tail to shield Maggie's head from the driving rain. The gesture was small in practical terms, but enormous in its emotional significance, a moment of reciprocal care that spoke to how completely he had internalized her lessons about protecting those you love. "Look at this sequence," Emily told the team during their evening briefing, her voice thick with emotion as she pointed to the screen. "He's not just receiving care anymore, he's actively providing it. That's evidence of genuine emotional attachment and empathetic response, not mere dependency or learned behavior." As autumn approached and Benji neared his first birthday, his first successful solo hunt provided another crucial milestone in their relationship. At 7 months old, he finally managed to catch a rabbit entirely on his own, a small victory by adult predator standards, but a momentous achievement for a young animal learning to navigate the world. Sarah watched through her binoculars as the young lion employed techniques that were uniquely his own, a seamless blend of leopard stealth and lion power that made him formidable despite his youth. His approach was patient and calculated, showing Maggie's influence in every movement. But his final pounce carried the explosive power that marked him unmistakably as a lion. What happened next left Sarah speechless and brought tears to her eyes. Instead of devouring his prize immediately, as hunger and predatory instinct would normally dictate, Benji carefully carried the rabbit back to their nest. He laid it at Maggie's feet like a ceremonial offering, his golden eyes bright with unmistakable pride and deep affection. The gesture was so loaded with gratitude and love that it transcended the boundaries between human and animal emotion. "He's not just thanking her," Sarah whispered into her recording device, her voice breaking with the magnitude of what she was witnessing. "He's honoring her. This is conscious gratitude, deliberate recognition of everything she's given him." The most sophisticated example of their relationship emerged as Benji grew more confident and skilled in his hunting abilities. Maggie began staging elaborate failures during their practice sessions, performing masterful theatrical defeats that allowed him to succeed where she had supposedly failed. These performances were so convincing that it took the research team several weeks to recognize them as deliberate pedagogical tools. Jonathan was the first to identify the pattern during one of their late-night data analysis sessions. "Watch this sequence carefully," he told Sarah, showing her footage from 5 different hunting lessons spanning 2 weeks. "See how she approaches each piece of prey with perfect technique, then makes the exact same type of error at the crucial moment. That's not coincidence or declining skill, that's sophisticated educational theater." Maggie would stalk prey with her usual silent precision, positioning herself for what should have been a guaranteed successful hunt, then stumble at precisely the right moment to alert the quarry, or mistime a pounce in a way that looked convincingly accidental but was clearly intentional. Benji would then make his own attempt, often succeeding where his inexperienced mother had failed. Her pride in these moments was unmistakable, visible in the way she groomed him afterward and in the gentle rumbling purrs that accompanied their quiet time together. Dr. Reynolds was fascinated by these interactions, recognizing their unprecedented nature in wild animal behavior. "We're witnessing something that has never been documented in any species," she explained to a conference of international wildlife researchers via satellite link. "Deliberate pedagogical failure designed to build confidence in offspring requires not just intelligence, but sophisticated understanding of psychology, cause and effect, and long-term planning." The cognitive sophistication Maggie is demonstrating suggests levels of consciousness and emotional intelligence that challenge our fundamental assumptions about animal cognition. As winter approached and snow began to dust the higher elevations of the reserve, Benji's physical transformation became impossible to ignore. His mane began developing in earnest, a golden ruff that marked him unmistakably as a male lion approaching maturity. His voice deepened from the high mews of cubhood to the rumbling tones that would eventually become his adult roar. Most significantly, his size began to surpass Maggie's, his lion genetics asserting themselves with increasing authority despite his unconventional upbringing. The research team watched with fascination tinged by growing concern as Benji's development accelerated. At 18 months, he was approaching Maggie's weight, and his continued growth would soon make their shared arboreal lifestyle physically impossible. The branches that had easily supported a small cub now creaked ominously under his increasing mass. More troubling, his presence in leopard territory was beginning to attract hostile attention from the reserve's expanding lion population, who viewed the situation with mounting territorial aggression. Sarah found herself facing an ethical dilemma that had no precedent in conservation literature or wildlife management protocols. The team had debated intervention options for months, but every discussion ended in the same frustrating stalemate. Should they separate the pair before Benji's size made cohabitation dangerous for both animals? Should they relocate one or both to prevent potential territorial conflicts? Should they trust in the wisdom that had brought them together and allow the relationship to evolve naturally? Regardless of the potential consequences, we've crossed the line from objective observation to emotional investment, Sarah confided to Jonathan during one of their late-night strategy sessions. That's dangerous territory for researchers. But how do you maintain scientific detachment when witnessing something this extraordinary? How do you observe a miracle without becoming part of it? The decision, as it turned out, was not theirs to make. On a crystalline autumn morning when golden leaves drifted down from the sycamore like nature's benediction, and the air carried the crisp promise of winter, Maggie made a choice that demonstrated both the depth of her understanding and the ultimate selflessness of truly unconditional love. Sarah was conducting routine behavioral observations when she noticed Maggie exhibiting unusual movement patterns. The leopard was leading Benji away from their familiar territory with obvious purpose, her body language communicating urgent intent as she guided her adopted son toward the periphery of her domain. They climbed a rocky ridge that provided a panoramic view of the southern savanna, where a well-established lion pride had been thriving since the previous spring. Mother and son sat side by side on the rocky outcrop, Maggie's spotted coat creating a stark and poignant contrast to Benji's increasingly magnificent golden form. Through her high-powered binoculars from a concealed observation position nearly a mile away, Sarah watched them observe the pride below lionesses caring for their cubs with casual expertise. A magnificent male patrolling his territory's perimeter with regal authority. The complex social dynamics that defined lion society playing out in the afternoon sun, like a perfectly choreographed performance. The silent communication between them was heartbreaking in its eloquence and devastating in its finality. When Benji looked at Maggie, his eyes held questions that needed no vocalization. Is this my destiny? Are those my people? Do I belong with them instead of you? Is it time for me to leave the only mother I've ever known? Maggie's response was equally wordless, but unmistakably clear in its meaning. With a gentle nudge of her head toward the savanna below, followed by what could only be described as an encouraging push toward the descending path, she gave him permission to explore his heritage, to discover his place among his own kind, to become the lion he was always meant to be. She understands what he needs better than he does, Sarah whispered into her recording device, her voice tight with emotion as she documented this pivotal moment. Somehow, she knows this transition is necessary for his development, even though it means losing the most important relationship in her life. The parting was heartbreaking in its quiet dignity. No dramatic farewell, no extended ceremony of goodbye, just the simple grace of a mother releasing her beloved child into an uncertain world. Benji nuzzled against Maggie one final time, a gesture that encompassed everything she had given him, life itself. Love without conditions. Education tailored to his unique needs, confidence in his abilities, and the courage to face whatever challenges awaited him. Then, moving with the assured confidence she had spent months nurturing in him, he began his descent toward the pride, toward the life that his genetics and size demanded, toward a future that would test everything she had taught him. Sarah held her breath as she documented the initial encounter through her telephoto lens, her heart pounding with the tension of the moment. The pride's dominant male approached with obvious suspicion, his massive mane bristling as he assessed this stranger who carried unfamiliar scents and moved with unusual confidence. The lionesses formed a protective semicircle around their cubs, every muscle tense for potential conflict, their eyes fixed on Benji with the alertness of experienced mothers evaluating a possible threat. For several minutes that felt like hours. The outcome balanced on a knife's edge. The slightest aggressive move from either side could have triggered a battle that would almost certainly have ended in tragedy. But something in Benji's demeanor, perhaps the confidence Maggie had instilled in him, the unique blend of leopard cunning and lion strength he embodied, or simply the wisdom of a young animal who had learned that patience often succeeded where aggression failed, gave the older lion pause. When Benji finally vocalized his first full adult call, the sound that emerged was unlike anything Sarah had heard in her decades of field research. It carried the deep resonance and commanding presence of a mature lion's roar. But underneath was something else entirely, a subtle hissing quality that spoke to his unusual upbringing, creating an acoustic bridge between two species that had found common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances. The sound seemed to puzzle the pride initially, but there was something in its unique timbre that communicated non-aggression more effectively than any traditional lion vocalization might have done. The dominant male's posture gradually relaxed, and one of the younger lionesses took a tentative step forward, her natural curiosity overcoming her initial wariness. The pride's acceptance was gradual but ultimately complete and wholehearted. Over the following weeks, Sarah documented Benji's integration into lion society with growing amazement and professional fascination. His hunting techniques, learned in Maggie's aerial classroom, proved remarkably effective when adapted to savanna terrain and group dynamics. He organized ambush hunts from elevated positions, using rock formations and fallen logs the way Maggie had taught him to use branches and tree forks. His success rate was extraordinary by any measure, but more impressive was his collaborative leadership style, so different from the typical dominance-based approach that characterized most lion prides. The combination of strategic thinking, patience, and tactical innovation he brought to their hunting expeditions increased the pride's overall success rate by nearly 40%, according to Sarah's careful calculations. Within 8 months, Benji had become the pride's acknowledged leader, not through violence, intimidation, or traditional challenges to authority, but through the consistent demonstration of intelligence, strategic thinking, and genuine care for every member of his adopted family. His approach to conflict resolution, learned from a solitary predator who had never had the luxury of pack support, brought a new dynamic to pride politics that emphasized cooperation over competition. But perhaps the most remarkable and touching aspect of Benji's new life was his unwavering loyalty to his adoptive mother. Every dry season, when the rains ended and the savanna grass turned the color of burnished gold, he would make the pilgrimage back to the sycamore tree. These weren't casual social visits, but ceremonies of gratitude, complete with offerings of fresh kills that he would leave at the base of Maggie's tree, gifts from a son who had never forgotten the mother who saved his life and shaped his character. Sarah documented these reunions with growing wonder and deep emotional investment. The interactions between them had evolved and matured, but never diminished in intensity or meaning. Maggie, now showing her age with a graying muzzle, slower movements, and the dignified bearing of a respected elder, would descend from her high perch to greet him with obvious joy. They would spend hours together during these visits, grooming each other with the same careful attention they had shared when he was small, engaging in quiet conversations conducted in a language of touches, sounds, and glances that needed no human translation. These reunions became legendary among the research staff, who would quietly gather to witness the annual affirmation of a bond that transcended every boundary nature had constructed. Their relationship hasn't weakened or become nostalgic, Emily observed during one of these remarkable encounters. If anything, it's become more refined, more purposeful, more consciously maintained. This isn't just sentiment, it's a deliberate choice to honor and preserve something precious. As the years passed and Maggie entered her senior years with the grace and wisdom of a life well lived, her active hunting days gradually came to an end. She spent most of her time in the high branches of her beloved sycamore. Her movements economical and deliberate, her energy conserved for the things that truly mattered. Age had clouded her once razor-sharp vision and slowed her legendary reflexes, but her other senses remained acute and her mind sharp. The research team noticed that whenever that distinctive hiss roar echoed across the landscape, Benji's unique signature call that marked his territory and announced his presence, her ears would prick up, and a look of serene satisfaction would cross her weathered features. In those moments, she seemed to embody a kind of maternal contentment that spoke to the deep fulfillment that comes from having successfully raised a child against impossible odds. 9 years after the adoption that had changed everything they thought they knew about animal behavior, Sarah was preparing to conclude her comprehensive long-term study when that familiar mixed roar drifted across the reserve one golden autumn evening. Through her binoculars, she could see Maggie in her customary position on the highest accessible branch, head raised toward the sound with an expression of unmistakable love and pride. Every scientific principle we've established says what we witnessed should have been biologically impossible, Sarah wrote in her comprehensive final report, her words carrying the weight of nearly a decade of intensive observation and profound wonder. Genetic programming, evolutionary instincts, species-specific behavioral patterns, neurochemical bonding mechanisms, all of it should have prevented what we observed between Maggie and Benji. Yet here we have documented, irrefutable proof that love, in its purest and most transcendent form, can overcome even the most fundamental boundaries that millions of years of evolution have constructed. The story of Maggie and Benji became legendary not just in conservation circles, but throughout the global scientific community, inspiring research into interspecies relationships, challenging long-held assumptions about the rigidity of animal behavior, and opening new fields of inquiry into the nature of consciousness, love, and the bonds that connect all living things. Universities incorporated their case study into curricula ranging from animal psychology to philosophy, and wildlife biologists from around the world made pilgrimages to Big Sky Reserve to see the tree where the impossible had become reality. But for Sarah and the others who had witnessed the miracle firsthand, it represented something more profound than scientific discovery, a reminder that in a world often defined by competition, aggression, and survival of the fittest, there remained space for grace, for love that transcended every boundary that nature and evolution had constructed, for connections that proved the heart's capacity to recognize and nurture life regardless of its form or origin. In the wild landscapes of Big Sky Reserve, where ancient rhythms still pulse beneath vast Montana skies, and the cycle of seasons continues its eternal dance, the sycamore tree stands as a living monument to an impossible love. And sometimes, in the quiet moments of evening, when the wind carries sounds across the savanna and the last light of day paints the world in shades of gold and amber, you can still hear the echo of that unique roar, part lion, part something else entirely, part miracle made manifest, a testament to the enduring truth that motherhood requires not the same species, not the same genetics, not the same evolutionary history, but simply the same limitless capacity of the heart to recognize, protect, and nurture life in all its magnificent diversity. The bond between Maggie and Benji proved that the most powerful force in nature isn't tooth or claw, beat or strength, but the simple, though transformative power of unconditional love. In their extraordinary story, the boundaries that science had declared absolute dissolved like morning mist before the rising sun, replaced by something far more enduring and infinitely more beautiful, the unbreakable connection between a mother and her child. Chosen not by the accidents of biology or the dictates of evolution, but by the infinite capacity of the heart to love without limit, without condition, and without end.